There is a moment when silence does not feel safe anymore. Not in the room, not in the press conference, not even in your own head. History keeps doing this. Someone warns that the war is coming, and then someone else is left to pick up the pieces. I am Joe Khawli. 2 decades ago, I was a junior reporter in Lebanon, covering the Iraq War from a local TV station. I remember counting the rising number of US soldiers killed, and I remember reading statements from American ambassadors trying to understand what they meant beneath the polished words. And now I'm sitting across from one. Since then, I have reported from the front lines of power, from war zones in the Middle East to closed-door briefings in Washington. And here's what I've learned. In diplomacy, truth is rarely convenient, but sometimes it's the only thing that cuts through the fog. Welcome to The Diplomat, where we decode what power says and what it tries not to say. My guest is Ambassador James Jeffrey. He co-wrote the memo that warned invading Iraq could unleash a perfect storm. Then he stepped into that storm. As U.S. ambassador to Iraq, as the voice warning about Iran's reach, as the blunt diplomat who said the United States cannot keep giving unlimited support to everyone. In this episode, we step inside the rooms where strategy met denial, and where honesty, at times, felt like the most dangerous act. You will hear in this episode what Washington refused to see about post-invasion Iraq, why Erdogan's Turkey became more than an ally in crisis, and how speaking plainly about war crimes and troop withdrawals came with a cost. Because when alliance break and lies start to feel like plans, it takes more than one sentence to change everything. This is The Diplomat, inside the room where power speaks. And this is a conversation you won't hear anywhere else. Mr. Ambassador, thank you for being with us. Let's start with Iraq. When you stepped into Baghdad as ambassador, you were walking into a war that had already broken a president's legacy, fractured a region, and divided your own department. But you still had to speak for the United States. What was the first thing you chose to say in that room, and why?
I would challenge the position. It sounded more like when I walked into Iraq as the deputy chief of mission in 2004, but we're talking about my time as ambassador in 2010 to 2012. By that time, we had a relatively successful policy in Iraq. We were on a glide path to withdraw all of our troops by the end of 2011. That had been part of the agreement between President Bush and the Iraqi government in 2008. And the violence levels were way down. Iraq was struggling a bit, but it was still getting to its feet as a relatively normal country. I'm not happy with everything that's happened to it since 2010, particularly the Iranian influence and, of course, the Islamic State attack in 2014. But nonetheless, in contrast to Afghanistan, Iraq was a success. And this was my basic message. And the message was not created by me. It was created by Barack Obama just before I went out there in what's known as the Camp Lejeune speech from 2009 about Iraq. And it contained two elements. First of all, the United States considered Iraq important. We had what is known in business as sunk costs of American commitment, American engagement, American billions of dollars, and of course, many people killed and wounded. And we recognize it as a very, very important country. It's the second largest OPEC oil producer today, for example. The second part of the message, which again was channeling Barack Obama, was we're not here to fix every problem you have. This is basically a precursor to what President Trump in Riyadh said just a few weeks ago, which is that America is not involved in tinkering with the internal structure of countries. We had tinkered with Iraq. Frankly, we had to, because we basically overthrew the entire, not just the state, but the government, the society to some degree in 2003 by our invasion. And so we had a responsibility, but we were out of that business. We weren't real good at it. And so those were the 2 points that I made. And the conduct of my entire 2 years there followed that pattern.
But when you say, Mr. Ambassador, that Iraq was too important, and then followed by Barack Obama's message that we're not here to fix everything, to what extent do you think those 2 messages are contradicting? Because if it is important, in a way, you have to fix something.
The biggest single question in American foreign policy after 1989, when you had the unipolar world, the end of history, and we believed that we had the capability and the mission, the responsibility, the duty to make the whole world look like us or Western Europe, modern liberal societies, because we thought that modern liberal societies provided prosperity, provided peace, and provided free political development, the 3 Ps. And we looked at our experience, the experience of Europe, Western Europe at least, some East Asian countries, and bits and pieces of Latin America. And we said, look, this works for all of us. It should work for you. So that was a judgment. And a second judgment, B, we have the capabilities, the inspiration, the power to get you to do this. The problem with this was we didn't. And that's not just only a question of lack of commitment, unwillingness of the American people to bear the cost, particularly when they involved actual deployment of military forces, because that eventually led to the deployment of military forces. But it also encountered a core contradiction. We were intervening deeply into other countries, Afghanistan, Iraq, Eastern Europe, along with the EU, and in the Arab Spring, other countries, to create political self-government for both those states and the people in them on the basis of our liberal philosophy. And that's a contradiction, because we were determining what they should look like and then taking the reins to get them to that point, even though the core of that point was that people should make their own decisions.
So what is the lesson in that?
The lesson is we can't do that. The lesson is the world has to deal with itself. We can deal with several things. First of all, to the extent that countries want to trade with us, want to have relations with us on a state-to-state level, we're willing to do that. To the extent that countries threaten us or the international order or our partners and allies, we will try to deter their actions and contain their long-term expansionist tendencies. Iran is a good example of that, Russia, China, but that we are not any longer going to get involved in the transformation of societies. So that started with Barack Obama in Iraq. Now, that was Barack Obama's personal view of Iraq. At the same time, as you know, he did the surge in Afghanistan and then was all in for the Arab Spring. So it wasn't a general principle for Barack Obama. It was solely a specific Iraq central idea based upon his conception, which turned out to be partially wrong, that Iraq was an American failure, and that we learned from the failure we shouldn't get involved in the internal constitution and governance of Iraq. The lesson, however, was correct. It's just replace Iraq with any state. And Barack Obama was not ready to take that step in 2009.
Why do you think he was not ready?
Because the belief that America had both the capability and the moral duty to make everybody look like us was deeply ingrained in all of these people, part of the liberal worldview that they had. And Barack Obama very much had that worldview.
And how is it different from today?
Well, President Trump doesn't have that worldview. President Trump's, first of all, view of a liberal democratic republic in terms of the role of the state, the role of the individual, is very different than that of what we would call the cosmopolitan, progressive, international opinion, what we would call the Davos class. And Trump, furthermore, is reflecting a isolationist trend in American internal politics that does not want to see the United States get involved militarily. And what we learned, if we wanted to change these societies, we had to do it on the back of tanks. They wouldn't change on their own.
Between Obama's message that we want the world to look like us, like the United States.
Except Iraq.
Except Iraq. And today's Trump, as you use the word isolationism.
No, he has an isolationist element that he has to be cognizant of. But boy, I would say we're now here in June. I would say looking at what he's done in the Middle East in the last 6 months is certainly not isolationist. He's run one war with questionable outcome, but it still led to a ceasefire with Yemen. And he has been extremely active on the Gaza, on the Lebanese, on the Syrian in particular, and on the Iranian nuclear files. So I wouldn't say he's isolationist, but he's very cautious about committing troops, particularly ground troops, and he's very cautious about committing them for transformational societal change. He was bombing the Houthis because they were shooting at ships in the Red Sea. When they agreed to stop shooting at ships in the Red Sea, he stopped bombing. He didn't require the Houthis to sever their ties with Iran, to embrace liberal democracy or anything else. He just left it alone.
So what you're trying to say that Obama, when he came, he wanted to fix the legacy of the United States involvement in other countries, in Iraq and Afghanistan. The effort of Obama trying to fix that, you think backlashed?
No, again, Obama came in with the same worldview, essentially, that George W. Bush had and that Bill Clinton had before him, that we have this mission and the capability, as they talk in military terms, both the intention and the capability. We had both the intention, driven by our moral obligation, and the capability, be it the lure of Silicon Valley, be it the power of the U.S. military, whatever, to effect this transformation. Obama made an exception with Iraq because of the ideology of the Democratic Party and his element of it, that Iraq was a violation of American principles by invading a country that had not invaded us or done anything to us. Afghanistan was different. Iraq was the exception. Partially because, and people don't recognize this because President Bush and many around him have avoided underlining the fact that it was they who said the U.S. troops would leave at the end of 2011, whereas it was fun to blame Barack Obama because they left on his watch, but they didn't leave on his decision. The decision was taken formally by President Bush in essentially a international agreement with Iraq in 2008. But getting back to Obama, his instinct was more correct than he thought. It just wasn't just Iraq, which actually turned out relatively successful compared to Afghanistan. It was all of our interventions in the internal affairs of countries in the Middle East, and beyond that, our interventions around the world. They have not led to better or more stable societies in most places. They have not gotten, if you will, our brand to be accepted by the people. And as the part of the brand is the people, sovereignty and people decide, it's very complicated to try to enforce that on people. But basically, and even though it's in trouble right now, the best success we had after the Marshall Plan, and that's now almost 75 years old, was in Colombia, and one country is not enough to justify a whole international agenda for 30 years.
When you were DCM in Iraq, and then when you walked in Baghdad as the new U.S. ambassador and after the surge, what did you see that Washington couldn't? And how did that shape what you knew you could say and what you couldn't say?
Sure. What I saw was that Washington, and particularly the U.S. Army, were totally committed at the institutional and bureaucratic level to nation building. The U.S. Army was leaving at the end of November 2011. Now, after we were there a few months, we persuaded the Obama administration to try to keep the troops on. We negotiated with the Iraqi government. In the end, because we insisted that this be done democratically, the Iraqi government and parliament, under the influence of the Iranians, opted not to keep U.S. troops on, which led perhaps to Iraq's collapse in the attack of ISIS 2 years later, but that's going ahead. The question is, what did I see there that Washington couldn't see? What I saw was that this was a country that was ready, that was, compared to what I had seen in 2004, 2005, was able to more or less function, had a security force, had a couple of million barrels of oil being exported every day, had not functioning electricity. It still doesn't have it today, but it had a certain amount of electricity. It had a certain amount of coping. It had government structures. It looked like a state by 2010. Yet we still had these huge programs, billions and billions of dollars of USAID and State Department programs, and the U.S. military had become so embedded into the society that they had 1,400 discrete operations and activities other than combat operations and defending themselves.
What do you mean discrete?
Well, providing essentially what they would call information operations. They had 50 people preparing messages that would be sent to the Iraqi media on the U.S. military presence, on the U.S. goals in Iraq, on various other things, on how democracy works. And my belief was that Obama, at least on this issue, given his Camp Lejeune speech, had tried to sever this role. The rest of the bureaucracy hadn't gotten the message. So I had to balance the two.
So why was it important to have that discrete operation to oversee what the media was saying?
Because it was part of a larger transformation of the military after it had failed by pure brute force in both Afghanistan and Iraq to subdue insurgencies. It relearned what we had learned in the Vietnam War, which was counterinsurgency, which requires deep involvement with the population, both to defend the population and to help the population develop their own capacity to defend themselves from local police to a national army that would then free us to go away. That was the military's doctrine. It was a struggle from the period 2004, and I lived through this through 2007, to get the military to accept that doctrine. They did accept it. The problem is the doctrine had its own problems. In the short run, it succeeded in Iraq, at least in subduing the insurgency. It never succeeded in subduing the insurgency in Afghanistan.
You were managing a $6 billion operation.
After the military left, yes.
Yeah, and 16,000 personnel.
Yes.
But when power shifted in Iraq, it often happened in whispers, not in memos. So when did you first realize that size did not equal control?
I realized we would not be able to take over all of these functions and effectively spend the $6 billion and be present everywhere in the country and essentially do the military's role. The idea of the military and much of the bureaucracy was that Obama was not willing to challenge was we would simply take on all of these nation-building functions with the $6 billion and with the 16,000 people all over the country. It's just that there was still enough violence in the country and enough hatred of the United States among some of the Shia groups fueled by Iran and among some of the Sunnis fueled by the remnants of al-Qaeda that it was still dangerous to move around unless you had a great deal of security. Security is very expensive, but it also limits your operations. So we couldn't function the way the military functioned. But secondly, the Iraqis really didn't want us to function that way. Washington did, because Washington, after a huge struggle involving internal debates between Rumsfeld and Vice President Cheney on one side, and Secretary Rice, later Secretary Gates, and President Bush on the other, had concluded that we had to do this huge nation building and that it was successful. To some degree, it had been in the short run, but it was not a long-term answer to Iraq, and the Iraqis didn't want it. My problem was that we had crucial interest in Iraq, keeping al-Qaeda from rising again. We saw that threat, and of course it did occur in 2014, keeping Iran from dominating the country. That was a huge interest, and keeping the country stable, keeping the country pumping oil and fueling its own development. So those were important goals. I didn't need 16,000 people and $6 billion to pursue those goals. What I did need was a consensus in Washington that I was doing my job, and people would answer my phone calls and people would give me the things I did need.
Did you tell them that you don't need that amount of money?
Of course not. I'm getting to that. I couldn't tell them, I don't need all of this stuff. The Iraqis don't want it. Forget it. And continue to be effective doing the things and getting from Washington the things we needed to really make a difference in Iraq on those things that an outside powerful country can with a country that is still facing security and development challenges. If I said, look, I don't want to continue rebuilding the whole country in our image. I just want to make sure that the Iranians are kept under control, that we don't see a rise of al-Qaeda, and that,
self-sufficient economy from
a self-sufficient
oil.
economy based on exploitation of the oil reserves, and a sort of modus operandi between the Sunni Arabs, Shia Arabs, and Kurds. That was my mission. That's what I spent 90% of my time with. I couldn't challenge the consensus in Washington, and it's as if they had never read what Barack Obama had written, at the same time as begging Washington to give me those resources that I felt I did need.
So there's a disconnect? There was a disconnect?
Yeah, there's a disconnect. And the way I did it was I just took the whole package.
You mentioned Iran, and you raised early alarms about Iran's grips tightening on Iraq. What did Washington refuse to believe, and what did that refusal cost, you think, today?
A great deal. We mishandled Iran's role in the region dramatically over the past 25 years. It has been reversed since the October 7th Hamas attack, largely because Iran overextended itself and because of actions by Israel, the United States, later Arab states, and Turkey and Syria. But it's dramatic that that has happened, but it was also dramatic that Iran was on its knees after losing the Iran-Iraq war, after losing the tanker war in the Gulf with us, and after going in a different direction for a decade with Rafsanjani, with Hatami, more moderate people who were trying to reach out to the West, it then went back on a aggressive, expansionist. It got away with that in the face of opposition from the Arab states, most of them other than Syria, the United States, Israel, and Turkey. Look how powerful that coalition was. How did Iran manage to insert itself into Iraq, into Syria, into Lebanon, into Gaza, into Yemen the way it did over these 20 years? Now, there's many answers to this, but part of it was we always had other priorities. The Bush administration was not particularly pro-Iranian, but it was far more focused on dealing with Sunni terrorists, be it al-Qaeda, be it the Taliban, be it the Iraqi opposition. And in Iraq, because it was so committed to democracy and because the Shia were the majority, it was perfectly happy to have Shia prime ministers, Jafari, then Maliki, and Iran to have a certain influence as long as they weren't shooting at us. because we had so many other problems in Iraq. So we ignored the Iranian creeping control of Iraqi institutions under Bush. Under Obama, to some degree, people around him and he himself actually believed in his statement to Jeff Goldberg of The Atlantic in 2015, I believe, referring to Saudi Arabia, but he was really referring to us Americans. We have to learn to share the region with Iran. That was Obama's belief. That Iran was acting in a difficult way, be it with its proxies, be it with its missiles, be it with its nuclear, because it felt threatened. And if we, rather than threaten Iran, held out a hand to Iran and let Iran play its historic role in the region, whatever that was, Iran would become moderate. Obama really believed in this. His real purpose in doing the nuclear deal was to jumpstart that integration of Iran into the modern world. And in a way, Obama thought Iran should look like Denmark too.
But between his intention to not keep the grip tighten on Iran and
on Iraq,
on Iran, in a way backfired. So are you accusing?
This was a very wrong policy. It missed.
So you're accusing Obama with the way he let Iran loose backfired. His intention were right, but the way 20 years ago Iran did not take that as a sign, but did whatever it wanted to do.
Right. He made the same mistake that liberals made in the 60s and 70s about the Soviet Union, that it was basically a defensive country that you could work out deals with. The Soviet Union was an expansionist country, and it is returned in the form of Putin's Russia as an expansionist country. The same thing with China. And the same thing with Iran. Obama missed that. By missing that, we were not allowed to have the tools to contest Iran's creeping infiltration into Iraq.
Is there any leader from the region, from the Middle East, from the Gulf countries, who told you that, what is Obama doing exactly with Iran?
Oh, yeah. Well, even before, both King Abdullah of Jordan and then King Abdullah of Saudi Arabia told me very bluntly, King Abdullah of Saudi Arabia twice in 2005, King Abdullah of Jordan once, what you're doing is facilitating Iran's march through the region, beginning with the prize Iraq.
So Washington did not believe you that you're conveying the messages from these leaders of the Middle East?
Dick Cheney did. And two, everything will be okay if we democratize the region. That was Bush's view. Obama's view was everything will be okay if we democratize the region and embrace Iran. He added embracing Iran. Bush didn't want to embrace Iran. He didn't want to confront Iran. The way to confront Iran for Bush was make the region democratic. Obama was even more positive about that. But the net result was, again, to explain why over these 20 years, Iran advanced to the huge position it was in, that it then blew away in 18 months from October 7th on. It's quite fascinating. But it was because other than in the last 2 years of the Trump 1 administration, 2018 to 2020, when I was there and other people were there, that was the only time we ever had a explicit policy of pushing back Iran in the region, in Syria, in Iraq, in Yemen, to some degree in Lebanon.
When you say back then, the United States wanted to democratize some states in the Middle East, many today would look at the United States, at the shape of democracy today, and they would ask questions. What do you think?
Democracies are not the answer to everything, but America is a democratic country. Whether the democracy we have now or under Bush or under Obama was the model for other countries, we didn't know. But what we had done was we had seen, not just in Western Europe, so much similar cultural and ethnic background, but in East Asia, Japan, Taiwan, South Korea, And it was beginning to work in Eastern Europe after the fall of the wall. So why wouldn't it work in the Middle East? It had worked in most of Latin America, is relatively democratic, is relatively progressive. It has its problems, but it has come a long way.
Do you have an answer to that? Why it didn't work in the Middle East?
No.
That kind of democracy?
No, I don't. What I have an answer to is the question, can the United States, whatever the problem is that is making it not become the trajectory of Europe, and that the United States does not have the secret sauce to fix it and make it like Europe. That I know.
You were also in the room as Erdogan began redefining Turkey's relationship with the West. As an ally, Turkey today and part of the NATO, many would view Erdogan's moves as authoritarianism. Would you agree to that?
He is a believer in a powerful state authority that controls or influences all elements of public and certainly political life, be it the media, be it the judiciary and other things. That is what we call, from the American constitutional author, the Madisonian system of limited checks and balances. Government is not in Erdogan's DNA.
What do you mean it's not in Erdogan's DNA?
He doesn't believe that that's a good way to run a country.
Is a good way to run a country trying to imprison your political opponent and use military force against protesters and controlling and censoring the media?
Erdogan would say, I have good reasons for doing all of that. The key issue is Turkey still a democracy?
But were those moves, whether Erdogan thinks that those moves are essential for his power today or for a powerful state, but those moves, are they considered authoritarian moves?
I would say most American analysts of political would say those are authoritarian moves. I would say that Erdogan's argument would be, I'm still a democracy. How many democracies do we have in the Middle East?
Syria, the strategic fog and the brutal clarity. You admitted that the United States played shell games to obscure troop numbers in Syria. Take us into that room. What was that deception? Was it deception, or was it necessary in a tactic move to hold the line without triggering political backlash?
No, it was a misstatement when I said that.
You warned that pulling troops would embolden Iran and Assad,
I was very,
and Trump ordered it anyway.
Well, I was very much in favor of keeping troops on, but it's two separate issues, and it has been, you're right to raise the question, because it's been conflated politically, and it was the stupidest thing I ever said. And because while it was not inaccurate, I gave the impression that I had done it and that it had something to do with the troops being pulled out. This was something that Bolton and the president and a few other people, if we can believe Bolton's book, had worked out, and that's where the shell game idea came from. Bolton's expression was, it was poetic license on the number of troops to basically, if again, you can read his book, try not to get the president upset at the number of troops we had in there. Now, it's a totally different issue on whether pulling all the troops out or not was a good idea. I argued against it. The president said we were going to do that twice when I was in the job, in December of 2018 and then again in October of 2019. My job in both cases, which I executed to the best of my ability, was to make that work. The president changed his mind both times once it was made clear to him that the troops were not just there to fight the Islamic State, which he thought was a basically finished mission, but rather to control terrain, to deny it to Assad, Iran, and Russia, and to have a bigger impact on the region, which was the other purpose that we had troops there. It fell.
But you publicly condemned Turkey or the abuses by Turkey or Turkish-backed rebels in Syria.
I did.
And that's not standard protocol for the U.S. envoy. What made this moment too big for silence?
Well, because we were trying to do two things. We were trying to balance our relationship with the Syrian Democratic Forces, who were our partner, not just in the fight against the Islamic State, but in holding a huge part of Syria and denying it from, again, Iran, Russia, and Assad, while also trying to ensure that Turkey would not overreact to the threat which was inherent, and I recognized that the SDF, as an offshoot of the PKK, theoretically could exercise against Turkey. So it was a very delicate balance, and when either side stepped beyond what I and others felt was the right place, we felt we had to speak out.
You said that you prefer diplomacy behind closed doors, but also you're known for being the bluntest in public. Where's the line between being diplomatic and being complicit?
What you do behind closed doors is to develop trust among all sides that you are openly, honestly, and truly explaining U.S. interests and making commitments to the other sides that they can trust and build upon. If you're successful in that, then speaking out publicly can reinforce that trust in those relationships.
Did you ever feel in any way that your honesty in public made you a threat in the system?
No.
Were you criticized with that blunt honesty that you have?
Only on the question of the shell game. And as I said, that was a mistake.
So what do you think was the most difficult sentence or word that you had to say in a room?
I would say the most difficult conversations I had were with our partners and allies who expected us to support them more. And I had to say, be it on occasion the Israelis, the Turks, the Kurds, Arab states, that we were not willing to go that far.
The sentence or the sentiment that you think changed the temperature, the stakes, and the room itself?
Yeah, I mean, you all had a wonderful example of how this really plays out, because it was sadly and unfortunately played out in front of cameras when President Trump and Mr. Zelensky met. President Zelensky met in the Oval Office 3 months ago. Those kinds of conversations, you don't have the cards, pal. There's only so far I can go for you. Yeah, I'm going to have to say nice things about the Russians if we want to get any progress on a negotiated settlement. These are the kind of things we have to unfortunately say all of the time with our partners and allies. We normally do it behind closed doors.
And what happened in front of cameras with Zelensky, how would you describe it?
Well, it was horrible because the problem is we Americans have exalted expectations of how we treat our partners and allies. Reality is that we're running a global collective security system. It's kind of like an insurance policy that everybody buys into. But like all insurance policies, it has, or most of them, it has a deductible. That is, you, the beneficiary of our insurance, have to bear some of the risk and some of the cost. And we're not going to deliver 100% for you. Everybody expects, it's like a love affair. Everybody expects you're the significant other. But we are the significant other of 60 countries. And they all want our undying love up to, in the case of Vietnam, 500,000 of our young men and women. And we can't do that all over the world, or we'll drive ourselves bankrupt, bloodied, and crazy very quickly. So we have to limit. And the role of the diplomat is to eloquence, to be able to tell somebody to go to hell and have them think they'll enjoy the journey.
And what is one word, if you could, you would retire from language diplomatically? What is one word?
Unlimited.
Why is that?
Because no commitment we make, no relationship we embrace is unlimited. We can't run a global collective security system by making unlimited commitments to all these countries.
Do you think our allies in the Middle East think that the United States is always willing to give unlimited support?
Oh, yeah.
And that is wrong from what side? From the United States showing that willingness or their perception of that?
From both sides. had we had a different dialogue with the Saudis over the years, or with the Emiratis, and if I were the, leader of American diplomacy for the last 50 years, I would sit down with everybody and say, look, we don't have the bandwidth to manage all of these fender-bender things,
Is this what Trump trying to say?
This is what Trump is trying to say. Essentially, I'm sorry, we're not going to stop what we're doing and go to war with Iran, go to war with North Korea, go to war with Cambodia in 1975, and on and on and on. That's not how we work. And because we have unlimited, that's how we got on this path, because we use unlimited all of the time, or words that suggest unlimited in our pitch for our diplomacy, we raise expectations. It's a good deal that we're doing what we're doing for Zelensky. Otherwise, he wouldn't still be there. It's a good deal that we liberated Kuwait. It's a good deal that we stopped the North
But Zelensky cannot
Koreans.
expect unlimited
But
support.
it's not unlimited, and we can't. If we try to do unlimited, we wind up doing nothing, and that would be a bad thing for the world.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador,
Okay.
for being with us.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to The Diplomat. If this conversation made you pause, rethink, or even get uncomfortable, that's not a glitch. That's the point. Because diplomacy isn't clean, it's not polished, and most of the time does not fit into sound bites. But when someone tells the truth without hiding behind a flag or the title, you will remember it. Follow the show wherever you listen to podcasts. And if this episode stirred something in you, send it to someone who still believes clarity is worth more than comfort. Every week, I sit down with people who have seen history break and try to shape what came next, behind closed doors, behind the headlines, and sometimes behind the price of silence. Because language isn't just how we talk about power and politics, it's how power and politics talk. This is The Diplomat, inside the room where power speaks. And this is a conversation you won't hear anywhere else.